the second part of the class, even though it's the last part of the class. And that is on the critique of science. And the two books, or I should say the critique of science and the critique of modern political thought generally, but all on the principles of modern political thought. And we're going to look at Shelley and Rousseau in these last 4 weeks. Now often I teach, instead of Shelley, a book called Gulliver's Travels by an Englishman named Jonathan Swift, who in the third part of that book of Gulliver's Travels, Gulliver, the guy who's traveling, travels to a place called Laputa. And Laputa is a flying island that is governed by scientists. They figured out how to take an island, move it up into the sky, and they have a kind of self-contained place. And from that island in the sky, they govern the entire land underneath them. They're very intelligent. They have figured out a way to get everyone to do what they want them to do because they have a perfect way of waging warfare. They take the island, they park it over a particular land, and then they tell them what to do. And if they don't do it, they keep blocking out the sun until everything underneath them withers. And if they don't give in then, they just land and smush them. And the scientists who govern Laputa, each one of them has a flapper. A flapper is someone who comes up to you while you're deep in thought and hits you on the side of the head so you can be returned to real life. And so these are the people who govern Laputa, and there's a long disquisition, and through the plot of the particular book, we get to see what Jonathan Swift thinks about science. And Jonathan Swift puts forward what I would call an ancient critique of science. That is, he tries to show how it's inhuman in some way, and doesn't genuinely lead to the wisdom that the scientists believe it does. Gulliver's Travels, you guys are all familiar with that book, right? Gulliver is the big guy, and we know him in comparison with Lilliputian, right? Gulliver is a big man among the Lilliputians. He's a big man among the moderns. But then he goes in the next book, book 2, to Brobdingnag. All the names are made up. And there, Gulliver is a small man among giants. That is Gulliver visiting the ancients. And then, in the third book, as I've just mentioned, Gulliver goes among the modern scientists to Laputa. There we see Gulliver as the man of common sense amidst those who are abstracted entirely from common life. And in the fourth book, Gulliver is among a land governed by horses. I don't know if any of you have gotten to the end of that book. It's the land of There's all these consonants in a row, but it's horses. And there Gulliver is living among the noble people of the ancient world, and is, of course, inferior to the horses himself. So the book is framed modern, ancient, modern, ancient. Gulliver is kind of in between. Among the moderns, he's better. Among the ancients, he's worse. It's a fantastic book. And Swift is, of course, known for being funny. And so it appeals somewhat to me. He's no Mel Brooks, but he's nevertheless quite funny. And Shelley's book, Frankenstein, is really the other great modern book that criticizes science. However, I would say that it's different in spirit from Swift's book in that it is motivated by modern concerns. Her criticism is one of whether or not science can genuinely serve humanity in the way science promises to. Swift questions whether or not science actually yields wisdom. Shelley questions whether or not science can genuinely serve humanity. That's like an unfair statement, but if I had to say things very quickly, and I do, that's what she's about. Now what I want to do at the beginning of class today is talk about the background of Shelley, but only in the theoretical sense. I really don't care all that much about her background as a human being. You guys probably know the story of Mary Shelley anyways, insofar as you need to. She was born to Mary Wollstonecraft and William Godwin, two radicals of the, 1780s, 90s time. And Mary Wollstonecraft, her mother, of course, gave birth to her. That's how it happens. and she died 10 days later of the injuries that she sustained during the childbirth. So Shelley was was raised by this radical utilitarian atheist type, William Godwin. And apparently did a good enough job to get her to dedicate the book to him. The book is dedicated to William Godwin. She later on married the famous Percy Shelley, who was a bit her senior, and was a romantic poet himself. Of all the things that Mary Shelley has written, Frankenstein is the only one I think that is worth reading, and that means we should read it if we're going to read her. Her other stuff, I'm not going to call it garbage, but you can come up with your own word. Okay, but as I say, you don't want to, when you think about people's background, you don't necessarily think about their biography, you think about like where they see themselves fitting into the world, or where they see themselves fitting into the intellectual life of their time. And here is where Shelley is interesting, because I think this book is clearly a critique of modern science, modern political science, and modern philosophy. Now, for the sake of simplicity, we're going to say that modern philosophy or modern political science is reducible to two propositions. First, it is a belief, as we've seen in many of the thinkers, that man can become, with proper technique, the lords and possessors of nature. The goal of science is to discover the secrets of nature, the laws of nature, so that we can then use those laws of nature to control nature and improve our own lives. Machiavelli calls this conquering chance. Bacon calls this relieving man's estate. Descartes calls it making us lords and masters of nature. We've seen in Locke the desire to secure comfortable self-preservation. Those are the goals of science, and not just natural science, but all science. We can live longer lives and hence be happy. This is the hope and ambition of modern science. The second principle, specifically with respect to the political communities that result from modern science, is that societies must create space for human freedom. That is, the principles of modern political science, especially as seen in Locke, include limited government and a respect for individual rights. Locke calls this, in the most capacious sense, property. The principles of modern science or modern political science will allow human beings space to pursue their own lives, their own visions, their own consciences, their own scientific inquiries, and will be obstacles to tyranny and superstition. Freedom is embraced for what it does and also for what it avoids, if you want to think of it like that. Now, there is a complaint about modern political science and modern political thought, and it is not one that is easily dismissed. It is a complaint that is traceable, we will see over the course of the next few weeks, to Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who wrote about 50 years before Shelley, and about a generation after Locke. And this complaint goes something like this. Modern societies make man miserable because man in modern societies are divided against themselves and conflicted. And what I mean by that is we are members of society and we are self-centered individuals. Well, which is it? We are members of churches and we are members of civil government. Well, which is it? We pursue our own interest and we are members of a broad community. Well, are we part of the common or are we individuals? We are divided against ourselves. We are pulled constantly both toward our inwardness and out toward society. And this conflict makes us miserable. Modern societies make man miserable. Moreover, and I think really in the same spirit, this is the spirit of the same criticism, modern societies have not really solved the problem of tyranny. They have made political tyranny possible, but we still have tyrannical souls out there. There are still people who love absolute arbitrary rule. And modern societies gives those people the space to follow their tyrannical ambitions in private life. We no longer have George III, but we have Hannibal Lecter. Thank you. I'm here all weekend. And the people precisely who exercise or desire to exercise tyrannical rule are the scientists. They are not motivated by a love of wisdom. They are motivated by a desire to control nature, and hence, perhaps, other human beings, that is, human nature. There's no reason for the scientist to stop at the conquest of nature. They may be interested in going on, continuing and conquering human nature, or maybe inventing human nature. Within the sphere of liberty that Locke carves out in civil government, we have space for tyrants to grow. And what is science itself but the most spiritualized vision of the will to power? Scientists themselves, as creatures, as we try to explain the phenomenon of the scientists, have little tyrants running around in their souls. It's not some simple, straight love of humanity or love of knowledge. It's the will to power, the desire for power over others that motivates the scientist. We used to have George III, but we've gotten rid of him. Locke's philosophy has been successful. We no longer have George III, but we do have the nuclear bomb. And we have the promise, say, of genetic engineering. And both of these things, I think, point nicely to the story of Frankenstein, where we have in the character of Victor Frankenstein, the scientist. Victor is miserable, and Victor is a would-be tyrant. To use, I think, the proper framework for the book, Victor wants to replace God with Victor. He wants to himself be the creator of a new race. And it seems like he's been a little bit successful. He creates the monster in his own image. But we'll talk about this as we go on. One of the hard things about teaching a novel is that it really would be best if you were done before I started teaching. Because you want to have the whole picture, you want to be able to talk about all of the characters and all of their depth and complexity at the same time. And for this particular class, we don't really have yet a picture of what the monster is like. We've looked at volume 1, we know the monster has been created, but we really haven't spent a lot of time with the monster. He lurks in the shadows. We know he's murdered someone. He sounds like a bad guy. Maybe he's just misunderstood, right? And we get that picture more as we go through in the other volumes. So it's much easier to teach a book when you're done than when you're than to do it in parts. And I think the only thing we can really effectively do in looking at volume 1 is look at the character of Victor. We can't yet look at the monster. But let me say this about the broad picture of the book, all right? Spoiler alerts, all right? There's going to be some spoiler alerts here. The key characters in the book are Victor and the monster. You get this right from those opening letters that Robert Walton writes. That is, the key characters in the book are the creator and the creature. Once again, I don't want to spoil the book entirely, so if you want to close your ears, you're certainly welcome to. Victor makes a monster, and the monster ends up tormenting him in various ways. The key to understanding the novel is the key to understanding each of those parts. Why does Victor make the monster? And why does the monster torment him? A different way of putting that same question, or those two questions, is simply to say this. The book's subtitle is The Modern Prometheus. Who's the modern Prometheus? Is it Victor, or is it the monster? Because each has characteristics of Prometheus himself. But in any event, all right, that's the end of my spoiler alert, all right? And you saw how it ends. You know, he's chasing the monster, that's how it ends. So it ends with a car chase of some sort in the Arctic. And I think, as I say, the only part of this two-pronged question that we can really answer today is, what is Victor? Why does Victor make the monster? Which I think is the theme of Volume 1. We really can't ask the question, why does the monster torment him, until the monster begins tormenting him, I think directly and explicitly, which happens in Book 2. So let's take a look at Victor, all right? So that's what we're going to do. Let's take a look at Victor. And I'm happy to get help here from y'all as we go through this. What is Victor all about? Let's take a look at a couple passages in here. Chapter 3, we have different page numbers. So I will say near the end of chapter 3, the third to last paragraph. What do we learn about Victor? He is the late child of a public-spirited man and a mother. A mother who seems to be the model of maternal care, who dies giving care to her own daughter, niece. Victor is a spoiled child. Can we agree on that? He seems to get everything he wants. His first memories are his mother's caresses and his father's good offices. They later on bring him a sister. In fact, he calls her my more than sister. It's a little creepy. We'll talk about that in a minute. Elizabeth enters the picture. I don't know what a more than sister is, but we find out almost in the book. What kind of a temperament does he have? Well, he seems to have a violent temperament and a curious one. That is, he is both violent and curious. In fact, I want to just go back here to page 37, the beginning of chapter 2. because he seems to love learning. The 4th paragraph of chapter 2. We have Victor giving a good account of Victor. Victor on Victor. My temper was sometimes violent. What page number you guys got? 19 in the Dover. 37 for those with the favorite numbering in my book, the Penguin Classic. It's very handsome. Nice margins. My temper was sometimes violent, my passions vehement, but by some law in my temperature, they were turned not toward childish pursuits, but to an eager desire to learn, and not to learn all things indiscriminately. I confess that neither the structure of languages, nor the code of governments, nor the politics of various states possessed attractions for me. It was the secrets of heaven and earth that I desired to learn, and whether it was the outward substance of things, or the inward spirit of nature and the mysterious soul of man that occupied me, still my inquiries were directed to the metaphysical, or in its highest sense, to the physical secrets of the world, end quote. So he is a combination of two things, violence and curiosity, and it's hard not to see these two things as related in his character. It's almost like his aggressiveness toward the world is best expressed through his attempt to recreate the world, or to understand and unlock its secrets. His pursuit of wisdom is a violence turned inward instead of outward. We might even say, and I think this is true, that science is the only acceptable outlet for Victor's violent impulses in the family that he comes from. I mean, go back to Machiavelli. Is the attempt to conquer nature or to conquer chance a violent one? What does he liken it to?
Holding a woman down.
Raping someone. Raping a woman, yes. I'm being too general. It's a violent act. And Victor, I think, embodies that violence or that aggressiveness. Let's just continue and think about his curiosity a little more. Go to where I was about to read, 47 in my book. Chapter 3, about the 4th last paragraph of chapter 3. The paragraph that begins with, "Such were the professor's words." 27 in the Dover. "Such were the professor's words. Rather let me say such words of the fate announced to destroy me. As I went on, I felt as if my soul were grappling with a palpable enemy. One by one, the various keys were touched which formed the mechanism of my being. Chord after chord was sounded, and soon my mind was filled with one thought, one conception, one purpose. So much has been done, exclaimed the soul of Frankenstein. More, far more will I achieve. Treading in the steps already marked, I will pioneer a new way, explore unknown powers, and unfold to the world the deepest mysteries of creation." This is a discoverer, a new Columbus, discovering, as Machiavelli talks about, a new moral continent. But he limits himself not to a moral continent, to the physical one. His ambitions are to be a bringer of new modes and orders. And he is encouraged to do that by whom? He is put on fire to do that by whom? His university professors. Both the young, or the old crotchety guy, and the modern noble guy. Like instill in him a love of chemistry and physical sciences, because within chemistry and physical sciences lie the secrets and the mysteries of life. If you want to be a creator, you need to master those particular sciences. Page 50 and 51, next chapter, 50 and 51 in my book, which is the third paragraph, one of the phenomena in chapter 5.
Page 30.
Page 30 in the Dover. To me, it's in chapter 4. Just a little bit before one of the phenomena go up. When I arrived at this point and had become well acquainted with the theory and practice of modern philosophy, as depended on the lessons of any of the professors at Ingolstadt, my residence there being no longer conducive to my improvements, I thought of returning to my friends in my native town, when an incident happened that protracted my stay. He thought of becoming a human being. He had this choice, go back home and become a human being or become a scientist. One of the phenomena which had peculiarly attracted my attention was the structure of the human frame, and indeed any animal endued with life. Whence, I often asked myself, did the principle of life proceed? It was a bold question, and one which has ever been considered as a mystery. Yet with how many things are we all upon the brink of becoming acquainted, if cowardice or carelessness did not restrain our enquiries? I resolved that circumstances in my mind and determined thenceforth to apply myself more particularly to those branches of natural philosophy which relate to physiology. To examine the cause of life, we must first have recourse to death, and he goes on. Keep it there for a moment. So at this moment, he has a particular choice to make. Kant is writing about the same time as Shelley. Says you have to have courage in order to follow enlightenment. This is exactly the thought that Victor here articulates. What could explain him not boldly continuing on to investigate the principle of life and the physiology on which it is based? Only, what does he say? Cowardice or carelessness could explain holding himself back. He is going to have the moral qualities, the courage to pursue this question. These previous thinkers had only thought about how to improve life, not gone down to the bottom and create it. Think of it like this. What does Hobbes do? What does Locke do? Or so what do Hobbes and Locke do? They create a body politic from the ground up. They're not interested in changing things on the fly or mitigating an already faulty frame. They want to start and make a new frame of government, a new civil government, laying its foundations on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as shall effect our safety and happiness, to quote our declaration, right? So that's what they want to do, go down to the bottom. Well, what has Bacon done? What has Descartes done? They have tried to find fruits and nourishment that will help us live longer, or medicines that will help us live longer. Why not go down to the root and make human beings start with human beings who don't have faulty parts? If we genuinely study not how to sustain life, but if we genuinely study how to generate life, we can make a more long-lasting life. Hobbes went all the way down to the bottom of political authority. Victor is going to go all the way down to the secrets of life. A thorough re-examination of all the premises. We haven't read the New Atlantis, but the New Atlantis, the scientists discover fruits that contain vitamin C. We call them oranges. And it helps people prevent scurvy. It's like, what a great discovery. But you know what? Wouldn't it be better to build a body that's not susceptible to scurvy? This could be something like Victor's ambition. To go all the way down to the bottom of human life in the same way Hobbes and Locke have done, going all the way to the bottom of political authority. He aims for God's goal of making life with the motives of a devil. This Victor, his inward aggressiveness, his violent temper, impel him to be a creator. Like Prometheus, right? The guy who stole fire from the gods. Victor wants to benefit mankind, right? He rebels against the established order by stealing, and Prometheus stole fire from the gods and brought it down to give it to humans. Well, what does Victor want to do? Steal the spark of life from the gods and bring it down to the humans. He steals the spark, literally in the book. I don't want to spoil the alert again. Spoiler alert, spoiler alert. Steals the spark from heaven and creates a new living being. He seems to be the modern Prometheus. And, like Prometheus, he brings disaster upon those who he's trying to help. And my point, in pointing all this out, is that Shelley shows that his motives are never quite as humane as Victor thinks. He's spoiled, he's used to getting his way, he's aggressive, he's violent, he's haphazard. He's not very careful when he makes the monster. He calls it a loathsome activity. He can barely look at himself. He's possessive, is he not? Let's just look at this for a moment. He's a possessive guy. Page 35 for those with my book. Right at the end of chapter 1, that must be. The last paragraph. When discussing the sister that he has brought, his more than sister. 17 for the Dover readers. Everyone loved Elizabeth. The passionate and most reverential attachment with which all regarded her became, while I shared it, my pride and my delight. On the evening previous to her being brought to my house, my mother said playfully, "I have a pretty present for you, Victor. Tomorrow he shall have it." And when on the morrow she presented Elizabeth to me as her promised gift, I, with childish seriousness, interpreted her words literally and looked upon Elizabeth as mine to protect, love, and cherish. All praises bestowed on her I received as made to a possession of my own. We called each other familiarly by the name cousin. No word, no expression could body forth the kind of relation in which she stood to me, my more than sister, since till death she was to be mine only. He looks at this other human being as his possession. And as parents, we have to say, encourage his thinking. Given the kind of kid he is, perhaps a parent should not have done that. Given the violence and possessive and spoiledness of the child, perhaps this is not your possession, it is not your gift, would be the approach to take. But his parents flatter all of his vices. And this possessiveness comes up when he's creating the monster. Page 52, a few pages back from where we just read earlier on the principle of life proceeding. It's chapter 4, page 52 for my numbering. When I found so astonishing a power. 32 for the Dover. There's just a lot of good stuff in here. Just before that paragraph, learn from me, if not by my precepts, at least by my example, how dangerous is the acquirement of knowledge, and how much happier the man is who believes his native town to be the world, and he who aspires to become greater than his nature will allow. So he kind of learns the problems of ambition. It's a little late. Now let's go into this paragraph. When I found so astonishing a power placed into my hands, I hesitated a long time concerning the manner in which I should employ it. He's learned how to create life. Although I possess the capacity of bestowing animation, yet to prepare a frame for the reception of it, with all its intricacies of fibers, muscles, and veins, still remained a work of inconceivable difficulty and labor. It would seem to encourage a lot of people to be hardworking, toward a kind of sense of responsibility, right? He says, look, I have the power to make inanimate creatures alive. And I recognize that it's an intricate thing to do. It's a difficult thing to do. The human body is a machine of infinite complexity. And I'm going to be responsible as a kind of creator for giving life to this being. It would seem to encourage a lot of people to become responsible and to say, I'm going to take my time and do it right. Not Victor. I doubted at first whether I should attempt the creation of a being like who? Like himself, or one of simpler organization. But my imagination was too much exalted by my first success to permit me to doubt my ability to give life to an animal as complex and wonderful as man. When people clone today, what do they start with?